Hello, everyone. I'm Eric McDermott, the co-director of the Institute for Business Analytics at Kelley School of Business here at Indiana University. And I'm pleased to have with me Steve Pratt, the consulting principal at Deloitte. And we appreciate our relationship with Deloitte and are thrilled to have this chat with him here today. So I'm going to just jump right in and ask some questions. So Steve, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self when you're starting out?
It's never easy to think about going back in time and answering that question. I think when I first started, it's kind of funny that I didn't even know what I was going to be doing. I remember accepting my first job. I thought I was going to be managing networks, and it turns out I was working with databases. And I think what I found out most was that it really isn't the technology that drove me as much as what's the context of the business problem I'm trying to solve. And that's what motivated me throughout. I was pre-med in school. And it meant that getting into something like life sciences and healthcare meant that I always had a passion for the topic that we were working with. So the technology solution behind it was just a tool to facilitate that end solution.
Fantastic, interesting. And even if you had known what you were going to do, you probably couldn't have envisioned what it would have looked like today. So fantastic. So what is the biggest way or biggest ways, and speaking of those changes, that technology has impacted the use of analytics in business, would you say?
So strangely enough, my focus area, even though it was pre-med, they had a major of computer studies. And it turns out it was actually artificial intelligence. Back then, what we were focused on was linguistics. And so I took less coding classes than I did linguistics classes, looking at language and how to break that down logically. You look at how technology has progressed, and the vast majority of it is speed, amount of power to not just compute, but store the data and then process through that. So the biggest thing has been that going from my first computer that I supported had a 20 megabit DASD, and was a very small processor. My phone has exponentially more power and storage on that. And so the technology has just evolved to where it's ready everywhere all the time, not just in the compute power of what you have in your hand, but the connectivity that it has across 5G. We have access to so much more information that allows us to leverage that in many more ways for business at real time in any situation.
Yeah, that's interesting with the linguistics. I think years ago, someone who didn't, like computer scientists probably would have understood very well why you're learning linguistics. You're basically a language. How do you communicate with a computer? But I think the general public kind of sees like, oh yeah, computers speak language and they use language. And so that at least would seem sensible, but what years ago probably would have been hard to understand, like, why, how do those two things connect together? So that's very interesting. Now, in terms of industries or organizations, and you've worked with and been involved with variety. So, are there any examples of industries or businesses or organizations in general that have been slow to use analytics in their operations, whether because of regulations that make it difficult or just the stubbornness or whatever the reason? And what do you anticipate will happen to some of those going forward?
Yeah. Being in and around the life sciences and healthcare space for a long time, you nailed it with regulations. In fact, I was talking to a group of people who said, well, what is it going to look like in 2030 in healthcare? And I said, look around, because if you can see it today, it'll take at least another 6-7 years for it to be in a regulated environment that you can use it in healthcare. And that's something that regulations and the legislatures are trying to address at all times. How do we get faster at responding to that? But it's not just healthcare and life sciences. It's all financial services, any regulated industry, aerospace. All of them have to be faster to adopt the technology, but yet maintain the risk aversion and the conservatism that they have to make sure that it's safe. And even if you look at some of what we're talking about today with generative AI and some of the technologies that are giving us lots of capability, and the question is not can we, but should we in many cases, that ethical dilemma is always going to be out there, and it's going to keep us in check from going too fast, but yet admit we have to go faster.
So data is extremely valuable, and nearly any firm can get more data that wants to do so. Right? It's a huge valuable commodity. This can be in conflict though with privacy of individuals, like we were talking about. So how do you see the challenges of navigating this, and what possible ways do you think it could end up? And I'm sure it's going to be different industry by industry. So speak as generally or specifically as you'd like.
I actually regularly use something that a client said to me many years ago. And I wish I could remember her name so I could give her credit for it. But she said, in the balance sheet of technology, information is an asset, but data is a liability. And you think about the more data you gather, it doesn't necessarily mean that more is better. First of all, you create a lot of anomalies with more data that you introduce. You have to be understanding of the value of each data set that you're putting in and the accuracy of each data set that you put in. But then you also have to understand its use. I've built systems that have to have an understanding of each data element and what its permissible use is, either based on the origin of that data, the contractual obligations of that data, but also the privacy of that data and what it can do for you, but what it could also do that could be bad for whoever that information is describing. And all too often we create situations that we don't understand, largely due to, and you hear a lot of talk about diversity in the technologists that we need, the people that need to be part of technology. And yes, diversity is important just because of those people. Diversity is hugely important because of the unanticipated consequences of including the wrong data for the wrong thing. And you won't even notice it if you don't have a lot of people working on your team to develop that solution, to look at it from all the different angles. So I just see that being an area where employees, solutions, customers, everyone is going to need that extra level of diversity in their solution building experience.
For those reasons, and then also there's this level of caution as well in terms of thinking about, I think about what the technology could do using technology very broadly, but what technology could do 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago versus what it's going to be next year, 10 years, 15 years from now. It's almost like comparing riding on a tricycle versus riding on a rocket or something. And if you have an unanticipated mistake that can cause harm, the rocket's left the barn, so to speak, right? And it's way down the road. Whereas before you could turn the ship around, if you will, if I'm using enough phrases there. All right, so I want to shift gears for a second, and you're a principal at Deloitte, and you have people working with you and working under you. How would you approach building a successful analytics team, or how would you advise someone to approach building a successful analytics team?
Yeah, I alluded to diversity a minute ago, so I'll say that that's already been answered. But diversity also comes in the form of the types of people that you put in. We use a program we call business chemistry. It's something we developed a long time ago to say, I need to have people who are big idea thinkers, pioneers. I need people who are there to just get stuff done, so our drivers. I need our integrators who work within the team and make sure everybody's working together. And then I need the guardians who are keeping us in check, making sure that all the T's are crossed, I's are dotted, whatever tick mark you want to put on that process. When you build a team that has all of those aspects, and that includes then having from that the understanding of the business, the understanding of the customer, or that user-centric design capability, and then the technology. And notice it was the last thing I said amongst all of that. The technology is hugely important, but understanding simply what question are we answering, what problem are we solving for, it requires all those other elements to be answered first before we start designing the technology, creating the solution, testing the product. Everything has to be done before you start doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there are all these advances of technologies, AI, and some of these other things where we think about it's very important for the skills that people who can develop those kinds of technologies, but it creates so many other opportunities for people who aren't coders or aren't skilled in those types of areas, but that can leverage it and really exploit it and communicate it to other people. Yes. And work with their team. So really interesting.
We just had a Chief Data and Analytics Officer Academy that we held for the first time last week. And that was actually a big piece of the conversation was, how do you make sure that all of the peers, even at the executive suite, have a certain level of tech savviness? And it's really the IT executive who has to be responsible for making sure that that's being done across the enterprise, because everyone has to have a better understanding of what the technology can do for them and might be upsetting in that place, but be disruptive, right? You want to be disruptive, but you don't want to be disrupted. Everybody has a difficulty with, do you want change? Do you want to change? Small differences make big changes in that. And I think we need to make sure that everyone is on board with what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked about some of the challenges and concerns. There's a great deal of concern on the part of some people in the general public, and particularly employees, worried about their job, worried about ways in which analytics, AI, et cetera, will impact their job. And certainly we know that some jobs will be enhanced, some more opportunities will be created, but some people are concerned about that. So can you discuss maybe what kinds of jobs or types of jobs that might be negatively impacted, and which are poised to be more positively impacted? And of course, then there are going to be others that don't exist now that are going to be positively impacted as well. So.
Of course. I think first, just to realize, we've done studies that have shown anytime someone knows that they're interacting with AI, confidence goes down. That's true of customers, and that's true of employees. That in an HR organization, if the chat bot that you're working with, once they realize it's a chat bot answering questions, it becomes less trusted. And then you have, of course, the issue of concern about, then is it going to disrupt my job? Is my job going away? One thing we've learned a long time ago, purely in technology, is that the best developers spent time first doing support. And the reason being is they saw what other people did, and then they didn't repeat those mistakes. Then they became a much better designer and developer. Now look at Gen AI and it creating code, it's going to be the same thing. You really need people to first realize, I'm going to be editing much more than I'm going to be writing. And so we need that type of mindset first. And if people adopt that, it's going to make their jobs better. It's going to make them more productive. We're going to see solutions being created faster. We're going to see responses to business needs faster. So most people will actually see benefit because of simply the speed to which they can accomplish things. But there are always going to be some that are disrupted because the nature of what they do today is that repetitive task. And they need to be prepared to evolve, decide what is the next thing that they would be able to do if they weren't doing that repetitive task that they're doing. But we saw this in previous industrial revolutions. We saw it with steam engine, we saw it with automation. It doesn't mean that the jobs necessarily go away. It just means the jobs absolutely have to evolve. And then, as you said, what are the new jobs that we're going to create? And there's so many new potential opportunities to leverage the data in the right way. But you also said it. Some of this is going to be jobs that are not necessarily technocentric. It's going to be, how are we putting ethics behind these? How are we auditing and validating and making sure that they are being used appropriately? There's going to be a lot of jobs that are created because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of interesting thoughts from what you were saying. That one about the person who was seeing another side of the job before they were creating the program, like those complementary skills. It sounds like also what you were thinking of the complementary skills within an individual and complementary perspectives, also the complementary perspectives and skills when you're building a team. So all of those seem so valuable. And it's interesting that you have these technologies advance, can create lots of new jobs, but it can be, challenging for people who, I think, a relative who is a truck driver, and I think he's glad to be retiring from truck driving for multiple reasons, but also because who knows what that's going to look like, if they're going to be self-driving or whatever in 20 years. And because once you have that much human capital in a specific thing for decades, it's not always easy those don't always transfer to other areas. So, but it creates a lot of exciting opportunities for other areas. So really interesting. Yeah.
We also don't realize what we can accomplish in some of those changes and those evolutions. So my father drove a fork truck for 33 years. Is it possible that a self-driving vehicle could have done that same work? Sure. And would have it disrupted his job? Sure. At the same time, he had several friends. They were working in a factory where it was high intensity heat. And he had a couple of times where he had to drive through and he wasn't sure he was going to make it out of that situation. There have been many people who have fallen ill from the exposure of things they had in that factory. And so how many lives could have been saved had it been automated and we had asked them to do something different amongst the job function overall? So things that appear at first to be majorly disruptive, we won't always see the benefits for a while, but I think the benefits will become evident.
Absolutely. It's an excellent point. I mean, thinking in terms of some of the self-driving type technologies right now where they're not to the self-driving yet, but they're, watching the driver, are they awake, et cetera. Because truck driving, again, as an example, that it's one of the biggest challenges, driving so many long hours, getting tired, and that's the biggest safety issue that they face probably. And so being able to monitor that, making sure the driver is awake, shutting things down if they're not, et cetera. So that's a really great point.
I think we've all been in a car with GPS and seen a red line on the GPS, knowing that there's something slowing down ahead, and we've started to slow down before we could ever see it. Just that little bit of anticipation can save lives.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. All right, so now I'm going to ask kind of another big picture type of question. So you've been involved in a number of different types of industries and firms, and what would you say are some of the transformative ways that analytics has influenced a business or industry or organization in a broad way over time? Yeah.
There's a phrase that you hear a lot, and it's interesting to me that different industries think that they own the term for some reason, but the idea of next best action. You hear it a lot in marketing, but whether it's Amazon trying to sell the next thing after what you just bought, that's an additive, and that's a great next best action. But we also see it in preventative maintenance. Someone's working on something and they know that when that part fails, a couple of other parts are probably also worn. So repair multiple things and prevent later on what could be either downtime or possibly even a disaster. For sure in healthcare, we're seeing it where as a patient presents with something, a physician or a nurse is being given multiple next best actions. It's not meant to supersede them, but to help inform them with higher likelihood of maybe something they didn't think about. And so any way that we can use the technology and the information to drive a way for people to think more pointedly, it doesn't take the thinking away. It simply hopefully focuses, hopefully raises awareness to something they might have missed, but also it means that it continues to learn in the process and everybody gets better at doing it.
That's fantastic. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been a pleasure. We want to thank Steve Pratt again, the principal at Deloitte, consulting principal at Deloitte. Again, this is Eric McDermott here with IBA in our interview series. Thank you.